In this video, we're going to use a 3D scan and Fusion 360 forms to design a cafe racer tail section for a Ducati 999, so stay tuned. Hey everyone, this is Matt with Learn Everything About Design, and in this video, we are going to create a tail section for Ducati 999. Now, what we have here is we've got a scan of the tank, so sent in by a subscriber, and they're building a cafe racer. So if you're not familiar with motorcycles or cafe racers, it's basically an older style tail section or an older style look. And it's basically, we're going to be creating that style of tail section, but the focus of this video is going to be on the process of getting it to fit up to the tank, as well as the basic overall process of how to start a design like this. So a few things that I do want to get out of the way. I'm still recovering from COVID, unfortunately, so I'm going to try to keep this video as short as possible, and I'm trying my hardest not to cough. And another thing that I do want to mention is that we do have a new website that's up now, and currently the website focuses on beginner content, but we will be putting more advanced content up here. So if you're having difficulties getting started with Fusion 360, we have an absolute beginner's guide to Fusion, which includes beginner's videos on things like freeform modeling, sheet metal, and surfacing. So if you want to check out some of those, or if you have somebody that's looking to learn Fusion and they don't really know where to start, this content was put together to be sort of the first or absolute beginning starting point. So there's a link in the description of the video where you can navigate to learn everything about design.com. So with that out of the way, let's go ahead and get started. Now, if you want to follow along, the user that sent this in said I could share the scan, so go ahead and download that from the description of the video. And what we're going to be doing is creating something very similar to what we have here, this basic shape. And I'm going to hide it to get started. And notice that this bike is slightly different, or the tank is slightly different than the way a lot of other motorcycles are built. So the tank actually extends down and under. So what we need to do is we need to match the shape, and then we need to build off of it. So the way that I like to do this is I'm going to get started with the face tool and use object snap. With this, what we can do is we can start drawing where we want this face to be. This is going to be somewhat of a sacrificial face. We're going to get rid of it, but this is our starting point. And we're going to snap and make sure that you go back to those original points. We are using the quad method, so we will need to have 4 sides. This is called simple. You can change it to multiple sides if you wish, if you need to do tries or something like that. But for us, what we're going to do is we're going to work our way around this shape and just kind of build out this initial shape. And then we're going to use symmetry, and this will be our good starting point. So again, from here, kind of come over, back. And this is usually the hardest part of this process, is trying to match the whatever object you're trying, if it's a car or motorcycle or whatever, this is usually the hardest part. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to symmetry and mirror duplicate. We're going to take this thing and we're going to mirror it across the YZ plane. I'm going to hide the tank for now, and then I want to merge these at the center. So merge edge, I'm going to select one, edge group 2, select the other, and now we've got our symmetry. So now if I bring the tank back, you can see that this thing is kind of inside. Now there's a couple things that we can do here. We can manually start to pull this around, or we can give the pull tool a try. We're just going to box select all the vertices and allow it to pull that out to the scan. Now this isn't a perfect solution, but this does get us started. And I will also say that Alt and 1 and Alt and 3 on the keyboard, that still is not working when you have any dialog open, unfortunately. So if you want to toggle back and forth, you need to use the selection options here. So unfortunately, we're going to have to avoid that. But at this stage, what we're going to do is start to make some manual manipulations on where we want this thing. So we used pull to get it close. And all I really care about is this upper edge. As I mentioned, the bottom is going to kind of go away. You could also use object snap here if you wanted it to snap to some geometry. At this stage, I like to do this a bit more manual. I know it's not a perfect solution because we're not attaching to something that's already there, but oftentimes I find that the scan might not be perfectly aligned, or we might be dealing with some other inconsistencies. So I like to do this part manually. And again, just going to go ahead and pull it out just to get us close enough. Now, the intent here is to get this sort of shape, and we can still do some tweaking after the fact. It's not like we're set in stone once we do this once, but I do want to get it kind of close at this stage. It is important that we get the basic shape as close as possible. Now, if you find that it's going under the scan and over the scan like we have here, in some cases you might need to add more divisions. There might need to be an extra edge in here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come to modify and insert edge, and I'm going to put one roughly in the middle here, and then I'm going to take that vertex and sort of move it out like that. This one I'm going to pull down. And again, all I care about is that top edge. So once we're happy with this, and I'm going to do just a little bit more tweaking here, but once we're happy with this shape, then we can start building out the tail section in 3D. So I think that looks pretty good. So I'm going to double click on this upper edge, go to a side view, use Alt and Control on a Windows machine or Alt and Command on a Mac, and pull this back. Now, the main reason that we're doing this is because that'll allow us to extrude with a creased edge. And we can already see here that this needs to come down further. So I'm going to use Control Z to undo. I'm going to Shift select that edge. I'm going to need to do this on the other side as well. Because when we have symmetry, you always want to select across the midline. So I try to get the entire edge. This is going to have a sharp corner here, but we're going to fix that later. So again, Alt and Control, begin pulling this back. And I'm just going to pull it back to here, say OK. And then I'm going to select this edge and get rid of that crease. So again, we're looking for that transition. We're going to have to do some manipulation. So again, we will need to do a little bit more manipulation, but we want to get started by selecting that edge, going to uncrease, and allow us to round that off just a bit. We will need to do a bit more in this corner, but as I mentioned, we're going to get rid of this entire inside section. So if you double click on that, shift select this because we want to keep that edge, and shift select this, and hit delete on the keyboard. It'll get rid of that entire thing, and now we're left with just this here. Now we still have symmetry, but we no longer have that lip on the inside. Now if you're building this thing out of fiberglass or carbon fiber, then likely you're going to have padding on this portion of the tank, and the tail section is going to mount somewhere else. So really all we're concerned with is this front or this leading edge. So now that I've done a little bit more, I'm going to go ahead and tweak this. This entire edge here needs to come out a bit. I'm going to pull that out, pull this bottom section out. And once we're happy with this transition, then we can start working on the overall shape. But we need to have this part good, and we need to be happy with it. So again, pull it down, move it around until you're happy with the location. Now, if you're not actually making this thing, then you don't obviously need to spend a ton of time. But once we have that, the next step we need to think about is going to be the transition to the next shape. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to double click on this edge. I'm going to reset my pivot point to the back of my midline here. And I'm going to begin scaling this in the Z direction just to flatten it out. So we can manually hit 0, and we're going to click in the canvas area to deselect that. And essentially we're still keeping the same shape, but we just flattened out the backside. So the next step is to begin building the rest of the shape. Now it can be a little tricky to figure out how to do this, and because we are creating this tail section shape, we are going to end up with some n-gons, some triangles or some 5-sided faces. We want to avoid it when possible, but in some cases we're just going to have them. So the way that I generally approach something like this is I want to start by building out both directions. So when we get those n-gons or those five-sided patches, it basically happens when we're doing a change in curvature. So we're going to go up and over, and then we need to come around, and somewhere in the middle we're going to have these triangles. So what I like to do is build the up and over and the around part individually, join them together, and then fill in the gaps. So we need to get started first by moving this point down a little bit. Again, we've got some tank and there will be some frame here, but I want to start to flare it out. And then I'm going to take these two edges. I'm going to go to a top view, and holding down Alt, I'm going to begin extruding this out, let go, hit Alt again, out, let go, hit Alt again. At some point you might start to angle this because we want to keep the direction sort of normal to those edges, and we'll hit Alt again. I'm not spending a ton of time worrying about the number of edges, but I'm trying to keep them a consistent distance. So this edge and this edge and this edge are all roughly about the same, and that's my goal at this point. So Alt one more time, kind of rotate these, and then we'll say okay. So this is going to be the rough shape. It's pretty flat right now, but this is just getting started. So we're going to take this and we're going to merge. Now you can use weld vertices or merge edge here. It really won't matter because we have symmetry. They're automatically going to snap to that middle position. So it's not like one is going to pull it one direction over the other. It should still stay symmetric about that plane. In some cases, if you're not using symmetry, then it is problematic. You need to pick the one that you want to move first and the direction you want it to go second. But now we've built the sort of outside shape. Now, this is a good time if you want to change the direction of anything. So for example, these faces, if I want to rotate them and pull them up to start to get this thing to angle, and this is a good time to do it while we're still dealing with these sort of minimal shapes. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to take 4 edges on the inside, and again, when we have symmetry, we want to select the edges across, otherwise they won't be joined in the middle. And we're going to follow the same process. So hold down Alt, we're going to come back and up a little bit, let go, and I'm looking to be roughly in line with this edge, and I'm going to start to come up a little bit. It's not going to be perfect. We are going to have to make some adjustments, but for right now, the general shape, these are my visual cues. I want to be in roughly that area. Alt again, Alt again, and then we'll do another one and sort of bring it back. So that's the basic shape. Again, it's pretty flat, but we are going to fix that. But right now what I want to do is I want to merge things together. So we're going to go back to weld vertices. And I'm going to start by taking this and pulling it all the way out here, this one here, and this one there. Okay, so again, basic shape. Remember, we are going to end up with some triangles somewhere, but for right now, all we're doing is we're building out that rough shape. When we're dealing with freeform modeling, we can make changes to the overall shape later. We don't have to have it perfect now, but worrying about the patches or the shape, the general shape, is going to be the key point that we want to follow. So now that we have this, these 4 faces are flat, which I want to change. And to do that, I'm going to go into box display mode. That's Alt and 1. I'm going to do some manual adjustments here. So I'm going to take this vertex and just pull it down. I'm going to go down 20, and I'll take this one and not 10, maybe a little bit less than that, and we'll go down 5. And we'll do the same thing back here. It doesn't necessarily need to be all that much. We can pull it out, pull this one down. And this one back here, we're going to pull inward. And same thing with this one. We want to avoid, with some exceptions, but we want to generally avoid these edges being collinear. We don't want them to be going the exact same direction. And let's take a look at this in smooth display. All right, so we're getting there. We still need to do some changes, right? Because this is the general shape that we're looking for. But again, right now, what we're doing is we're building out the basic shape, and we can spend as much time as we want later on by adjusting it. So now that we've got this basic shape, I'm going to take these edges and I'm going to pull them forward a bit. I'm going to take this edge, pull it down, these edges down and in. And again, this is slowly building that basic shape. It doesn't have to be perfect at the start, but we want to make sure that we take the time and make sure that things are going in the right direction. So these faces kind of want to bring up, maybe rotate just a little bit more. And I'll take these edges, bring them up a little bit. And this is going to be a problem here because these are mostly straight, so we will need to fix that. But for right now, it's not too bad. So I'm going to bring this back a little bit and rotate it. And there we go. Now we've got our basic shape. So the next thing to do is to start connecting them together. Once again, I mentioned that we are going to be running into the problem of triangular regions. We generally want to keep it in this transition here somewhere. It's not always the case. We can't always do that, but that's probably where we're going to aim to put it. Now we can use face with object snap again, and we can use this to start building out our four sides. And we can carry on. We can also use tools like fill hole. You can see here is where we're going to start to run into that issue with the triangle. And also note that we've got all of these different faces here. So what we're going to do is we're going to build that, but note it's not attached yet. So the way that we need to attach this is we're going to go to Insert Point, and we're going to just divide this face up. Right click to OK, right click to repeat, and we're just going to divide it up a couple times. You can also use Insert Edge if you're more comfortable using Insert Edge. The main reason that I do this is because sometimes it allows me to get them a little bit closer. And now we can use weld vertices. So we're going to bring this up. Now, after we do this, we can also convert these to T-points, but getting it connected right now is going to be important. And as long as we have sort of an extra edge down here, we can turn this from essentially a triangle into a four-sided patch. So what we're going to end up doing is we're going to divide this up a little bit more. But for right now, I'm going to go to fill hole and allow it to fill that. Let's reduce star. And then we'll take a look at this in smooth display. Now, you can see it's ugly in this area. It's something that we're going to have to fix. There are a couple ways to fix this. We can go into utilities and repair body, and we can convert some of these to T-points sometimes. So if we click on them, sometimes we're able to convert those. If not, then what we need to do is do some manual corrections to figure out how we want this shape to transition. Once again, there are various steps in this process depending on your level of comfort with Fusion and with freeform modeling. Some of these steps will be a little bit easier than others, but basically what we have here is we've got the shape where we transition from the tank, and now everything here is flat. So we need to start manipulating it, but we have the interesting problem of having these sections where we need to deal with the triangles. We need to deal with these sort of n-gon faces. So the way that I'm going to do this is I'm going to insert some edges, and I am going to play around with dividing this thing up a little bit differently. So I'm going to put an edge there, and I'm going to move it forward just slightly. This will also allow us to control the transition up here a little bit better. And then I'm going to go to Insert Point. So what we did was we took this and we made this essentially four-sided if we can get rid of this edge here. So in order to do that, actually let's go ahead and cancel off the insert point. In order to get rid of this edge, all we need to do is delete it. But then we have the interesting challenge of this right here. We want this essentially to be straight whenever we've got a T-point. So let's just do a couple of little tweaks here. Let's bring this up. And we'll bring this one up even though it's going to cause problems. and we need to deal with this. So after we delete it, then I like to go back and use insert point, bring it to this edge, which is essentially straight. This is going to now be my T point, and that's how I'm going to deal with that. I'm going to use insert point again. I'm going to carry this over, and I'm going to carry it down to here, which will allow me to focus that triangle up there, or we can also completely get rid of that triangle by coming up to this edge and carrying this one around the back. So we want to maybe go to here, and that lets us take that triangle, delete it, and now we've got 4 sides there, and we've moved the triangle down here. So if we take a look at this in smooth display, this looks a whole lot better than it did before when we kind of had that mess going on in here. It's still not perfect. This face right here is problematic, but now we can try to use repair body again. We've got a T point here. If we convert it to a star, it's not helping. This one's not helping. So let's go ahead and go back to box display and see what we can do. So this is essentially saying that this triangle to this point is my problem now. I want to make this 4-sided. So I'm going to take this right here and delete it. And then we need to delete this edge and then reconnect it. And again, the reason that we're doing this is when we delete an edge, the patch or the fix that Fusion does is it makes a straight line there. And then we come back over here because these two are not collinear. We need curvature here, but we want a true T point at this intersection here. So moving things around allows us to sort of play around with where things are. This corner is still not great, so what I'm going to do is select Make Uniform, allow it to soften things up a little bit. It's taking the size of each of those faces and it's spreading them out. And the next thing is we need to do a bit more work in this corner. So back to our box display, we are going to begin working on this shape. So this vertex here, I'm going to view it from the right. I want to pull this up and out. I'm going to do the same thing here. And basically what I'm doing is I want to drive what happens in this corner. I want to be in a bit more control than just inserting those edges. So we're going to take a look at it in smooth display, and that transition looks a bit better. So I think, again, moving the triangles away is important, putting them in different locations. In this case, we got rid of them by having T points down here, and these T points are fine. This corner is still going to be somewhat problematic. Now, it can get better if we decide to carry the curvature further away, or we can kind of leave it like this, and in box display, we can move these edges around to allow it to have more of an area to transition. So for example, if I want to pull this back and maybe pull this one forward a little bit, pull this one forward, and let's take a look at it from the top as well. So from the top, it's fairly flat, and I want to pull this out, and then I'm going to take these two and pull them back a little bit. Then take this one, pull it back just a little bit, and then we'll take a look at it in smooth display. So this is where a lot of the time is going to come in, because obviously if you're building something, you have a vision of what it needs to look like, and these minor tweaks are where you're going to spend most of your time. You can get to a shape like this relatively quickly. I mean, we can do it in just a few minutes, but the final details, that's where you're really going to spend a lot of time. We're not quite done with this yet. What I want to do now is I want to take these edges here, and I'm going to come all the way over to here. So holding down Control and double clicking will allow it to sort of fill in that gap. And then what we're going to do, because this will give me a midpoint, is I'm going to scale them inward this way. And then I'm going to scale them inward this way as well, and then move them forward. Now this rolls the tail under a little bit, And again, this is a little less of a cafe racer look. Most of the cafe racers, the tails went straight down, and it's part of the reason was due to how they were made and just sort of the design of the era. But again, playing around with these things, you want to make sure that you use tools like scale and scale everything toward a single location. And you want to move things as groups and keep them as sort of consistent as possible. And now, if we want to, we can take this bottom edge, and if we need to have a little bit more material here, we hold Alt, and I'm going to bring it down and back. I'm going to move my pivot point to the front, and then with that entire edge, I'm going to scale it toward the front. Now what this means is this edge, or this vertex here, is not going to move, but everything behind it will start to move at different rates based on how far it is away from that point. So it lets us roll under, and then I'm going to reset the pivot point. I'm going to put it right in the middle here. And then I'm going to scale it in this direction to allow them to sort of roll under as well. Now, once again, the goal here is to match the tank, the shape of the tank. I'm going to use Control and 4 on the keyboard to hide my edges. And we can see the way that the light hits the tank and carries along this edge. That is, in my opinion, that's pretty good. That's probably as good as we're going to get. The shape of the tank here looks like it carries pretty well into the rest of the tail section. And I think overall that looks pretty good. Now, once again, the design intent of this tail came from the subscriber building a cafe racer. So that's why we're making this shape. But you can apply the same technique to any other shape that you want. You really just have to spend the time to make sure that you're attaching or matching the tank or whatever you're attaching to, and have some sort of structured approach to the way in which you build your shape. Now, remember, we built sort of the outside shape first, and then we went up and over to build the bump on the tail section, and then we connected it together. Now, that stage was pretty quick, but then all the little details and nuances about where the star points are going to be, where we're going to have triangles or T-points, that is where the time investment is going to come. But now that we have the rough shape, if you want to play around with making different versions, all you really need to do is copy and paste. Because we're talking about direct modeling, there's no history involved. I can take this entire thing here and just rotate it and pull it up a little bit. And all the work that we did to sort of build it originally, nothing is lost. We were just able to make those tweaks and have a different version. So we've got more of a straight back, traditional style cafe racer. We've got one that sort of hooks up more in like a German Street Fighter style where the tail goes up at the end. And you can keep playing around with this as much as you want. Just make copies, copy and paste, leave them in the same location. They'll still have symmetry. All the work that you did to get here is still valid. And then you can just play around with tweaking the shape. The last thing that I want to say on this last copy is once you're happy with the shape, but you want to make some sort of minor adjustments, you can always turn on soft modification. And with soft modification, so for example, if I select these two faces here, based on my settings, so for example, if we set this to rectangular face count, based on those settings, we can begin moving this around and making gradual changes that have a diminishing effect on the overall shape. So for example, if I wanted to rotate those faces, you can see how that's adjusting the rest of the shape based on my settings. Now, once again, you can toggle this on and off. You can also go back and forth into box display. So with those changes, I want to be careful here and just take this and this, maybe pull it up a little bit. And once again, very quickly, we made a third variation. This is kind of like a late 90s GSXR tail, but so there we go. Original cafe racer, straight back, slight tweak with a copy, just rotating and moving it, and then using things like soft modification to get a different look. One last tip here that I want to leave you with is making sure that you understand that you can always go back. You can delete edges, you can add them in new locations, but you have to still have that same sort of structured approach. You have to be careful with getting the shape out of control too quickly. So for example, if I double click this edge and say I want to add a bit more of a crease here, I can come in and use the bevel tool, and maybe we want it to be fairly tight, about 0.2. I can say okay, and I can add that in. And if I use Control and 4 to hide my edges, now you can see that we've got a pretty nice edge. It still carries over to the front of the tank, but at the tank, that transition is a bit too tight. So what we can do is we can just select one of those edges and delete it, but it kind of kept that harder crease here. So we need to go back into utilities, try make uniform, allow it to smooth things back out. But when we use make uniform, then it affects where that beveled edge goes. So these are all things that you have to be careful with, because as soon as the shape starts to get a little bit more complex, these kinds of changes have a global impact on the design. This is why we start small. We get the shape at the tank first. We start to build it back. We build out the rough shape, and we add the detail in when we need it. So make sure that as you go through this process that you're happy with the rough shape. And if you're not sure what it's going to look like, I always suggest going back to box display. Box display is going to give you a better indication of the general shape, and that way you can use that as your guide to build out what the later version, once it has a bunch of edges on it, will look like. So make sure that you get those rough shapes in first and you're happy with those. Make plenty of copies. There's no problem with having a bunch of copies in here. And then once you're happy with that rough shape, then go back and start adding in those details. But just keep in mind that while you can delete edges and you can go back and insert edges again, it becomes harder and harder the more detail that gets added. But at this stage, I think that's as far as we're going to take this one. If you have any questions, please let me know. As always, thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.